Hi, hello, and welcome back to The Library is Opened. So I hope you brought your library card, my darlings. Little musical moment there for you. Welcome back. I hope you're doing well. So I got to thinking I had to film this video. Well, I didn't have to. No one's got their arm on my back, but I wanted to. And I thought, what have we not had for a while? We haven't had a bit of a bathroom moment for a bit, have we? So I dutifully decided to film in the bathroom. Interestingly enough, I am actually sat on the toilet at the moment. Rest assured, the lid is closed. There is nothing sordid going on whatsoever. It's just this is quite a decent angle for the light, such as the light we get at the moment at this time of year in England. So yeah, I'm feeling very colourful today, I have to say. I've got all my rainbows adorning my body, if you will. I don't know if that's like a response to the fact that we're smack bang in the middle of autumn. So, you know, as I say, we're getting less natural light, less sort of, you know, vibrant colours, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I quite like autumn and winter. They don't necessarily like me. I do have to sort of, you know, make more of an effort to take care of myself in those months, as I'm sure most people do, because I think I have a slight touch of SAD, or seasonal affective disorder. But you know, sort of in my head, I do like the seasons. You know, there's something really, as we've talked about in the past, something really cosy about them. You know, with the nights drawing in, you can get in an armchair, crack open a lovely book, and so on and so forth. And you know, there's something that I really enjoy about that image. So that's nice. So yeah, this week we are here to talk about a brand new release. Well, it was brand new a couple of weeks ago from when you're seeing this, but it is new out, and it is called D, A Tale of Two Worlds by Michel Faber. And I did talk about this in my most anticipated reads video coming up. So, you know, I decided to put my money where my mouth is, feel that anticipation, and then follow it through into an impulse and buy the book, which I did. And it's lovely, isn't it? Can we just appreciate the aesthetic quality of this? I mean, that's beautiful. You can't see, obviously, texture on video. What a concept. But it's got that sort of, it's that hardback where it's sort of like slightly knobbly. So there's like slightly raised bits on it and stuff like that. And I like the gilt letters and, you know, the inside flaps. Well, lovely. The end papers, I should say. So that's gorgeous. Now, this is interesting because I sort of said that I would talk about this, and now I'm coming to discuss it. I'm sort of a bit like, where do I kind of start with this one? Because it isn't exactly what I expected, but that's not a bad thing, if that makes sense. So perhaps I better start by just sort of going over what the premise of the book is. So our protagonist is Dickensian, who is a young girl who lives in a seaside town in the United Kingdom, although she's actually originally from Somaliland, which is a country that nobody in the book has heard of or believes exists, although it is absolutely an independent country. And her mum and dad are not on the scene, they're missing, and she's been adopted by an English couple who are very nice, very kind, but sort of, you know, there's that kind of classic trope of they're not quite on her level in terms of what her interests are, so on and so forth. So they're very lovely and kind of, what would be the word? I don't know, that word where they're sort of, you know, in charge, but I guess benevolent maybe. So they're very much in charge, but not in a negative way. Anyway, you know, so Dickensian has a very sort of particular way of looking at the world and a very sort of strong sense of her own identity, although it isn't always recognised by the people around her. You know, obviously she's a darker skinned girl in a predominantly white community, which has its own issues. Although these aren't dwelt on specifically in the book in that context, it's more later in the story as you know, we sort of juxtapose her identity and journey against what happens, sort of thing. So basically one day she notices that all the D's are starting to disappear from the world, which is an amazing concept, by the way, I might just add. it starts off with things in language. She's the only person who still remembers that there should be the letter D in words. It starts to affect conversations and stuff, and even her own name. Like, her teacher tells her that she's called Hikilo. Hikilo, sorry, not Dikilo. Why do I want to say Dikilio? It's wrong, it's Dikilo. Because the D no longer exists, and then with the things that start with the letter D, they start to disappear as well, so there's no such thing as dogs anymore. You know, all the sort of objects or concepts that begin with D have gone from the world, and she notices this. Anyway, one day, her old history teacher, who was a professor, she discovers that he's passed away, so she attends the funeral, and it's quite a strange. She sees the sort of pallbearers, if you will. She's the only person who goes to the actual graveyard, and then she sort of sees them disappear, and then she finds all their clothes in the bin, as though they've just completely ceased to exist. So anyway, she ends up going to the professor's house, where she eventually gains admittance and discovers that the professor is not in fact dead at all, but does have a quest for her, and he has this pet called Nellie, or Mrs. Robinson, who's a Labrador, but is not actually a Labrador. They're actually a Sphinx, and so together Mrs. Robinson and Dikilo have to go on a quest into another world to find what has happened to the Ds that are sort of threatening to destabilise the whole whole universe, if you will, because somebody's been stealing them. So they arrive in this other world, and they go through sort of various adventures where they come up against different tribes and groups of people that live in this new world who are either helpful or violent. And they soon learn that the ruler of the land, called the Gamp, has stolen the Ds, basically, because he wants to power this this machine, basically, that is helping him regain control. And in this world as well, there is it's sort of eternal winter, sort of a bit like Narnia, and you know, there's a lack of food and so on and so forth. And so Mrs. Robinson, or Nellie, and Dikilo travel to the sort of capital of the world to try and rescue the Ds, basically, and see what's going on there. And as I said, they have various adventures along the way. This is it's a great premise. I absolutely adore the premise. You know, what would we do one day if certain letters disappeared from language? And I love the idea that the letters or the language is connected to the concept of something. Like, if you no longer have the letters or words available to you to describe things, how can they exist? You know, I guess that's a philosophical question, isn't it? You know, can things exist until they're named, and if the names are taken away, do they cease to exist? It's fascinating. You could probably go down loads of sort of mental gymnastic courses thinking about that, which is never a bad thing. This is something of a departure in a way for Michel Faber, because obviously he's quite well known as an author who deals with sort of like quite large books. You know, one of his most famous, I would say, is Crimson Petal and the Why, which is massive. That's massive. It's huge. Which was adapted for the BBC. You know, and they're also quite adult books. You know, for instance, Crimson Petal deals with a sex worker called Sugar and her sort of exploits in Victorian England. And this one is very much, I wasn't sure whether it was, because I picked it up from the kind of general area of the bookshop. Although I believe, I've seen an interview with Michel Faber and he sort of thought of it as a children's book. I think he's quite, or, you know, suitable for children, which it absolutely is, by the way. But he was sort of resisting definitions in some respects, which is absolutely his right as the author. And I just thought that was fascinating, because it is quite simplistically told, and again, that's not a criticism. I just mean that, you know, you can sort of speed through it fairly quickly, because the language is not overtly complicated, it's more the ideas that are. And actually, maybe that's a good thing, because if the ideas are complex and require thinking through. Maybe the language should be simpler, or vice versa, so that you can have a sort of more intense experience. But I think it is written to be a bit of a sort of ripping yarn with kind of, I mean, he credits himself in the acknowledgements, the sort of Wonderland, Narnia, you know, there's allusions to the Wizard of Oz and so on and so forth. And I was surprised to learn at the end, because there's a sort of postscript where he talks that he started writing this book 30 years ago and completed it to coincide with I think it's the 150th birthday. Oh yeah, the 150th anniversary of Charles Dickens' death. So actually, when you go back through, and I sort of noticed a little bit on the way, but more prominently when I look back, that it very much is a sort of love letter to the Dickensian novel and all things about Dickens. So one of the adventures they go on, they stay in this hotel called Bleak House, for instance, or there's a sort of kind of passport sort of checkpoint Charlie called Mr. Pumblechook, and so on and so forth. And when you look at it in that way, it is a very Dickensian kind of fairy tale in terms of, you know, the sort of the whimsy of it, but also the political engagement. Like, the situation in this other world is there's a lot of parallels about or allusions to, you know, how corruptible power can be, and you know, the sort of the way that politicians and rulers manipulate the masses by giving them common enemies and so on and so forth. There's a really good scene with these characters called the Magwitches and the Gamp, who we finally meet towards the end, who are sort of his like political advisors. And it reminded me a little bit of, if you've seen the musical Wicked, the character of Madame Morrible and the Wizard of Oz, the characters of, I should say, in terms of how they sort of frame events in order to manipulate the populace and eventually turn the Wicked Witch of the West into the Wicked Witch of the West and make her a common enemy. And I think that's really well done, because I think absolutely that's something that happens in all governments across the world. You know, what's that famous saying? There's you want to bring people together, give them a common enemy, and you know, those common enemies, being enemies, are usually beneficial to the people in charge in helping them retain control. So yeah, very Dickensian in its whimsy, its use of magic, its use of, you know, sort of ideas and social reform and so on and so forth. And also, as I say, you know, through these clever little allusions throughout the book, I'm sure there are more. If I go back and read again, I'll probably be able to sort of checklist off what is an allusion to Dickens, which I kind of love that, and I wonder if, I suspect it is, that's why it's called D, as in Dickens sort of thing. I love the idea of Michel Faber having a little sort of fun in writing it, and, you know, sort of giving himself little, I guess what we call Easter eggs in there, but at the same time not compromising the story he wanted to tell, just doing it so that it's a little nice thing if you notice it, but if you don't, it's not going to impair your appreciation of the book. The characters are really interesting. We don't spend an awful lot of time with the tribes, for instance, but they're beautifully drawn. TLIO is a wonderful sort of protagonist, a kind of every person who's not every person, if that makes sense. Mrs. Robinson, or Nellie, who is the Sphinx, is wonderful. I love the idea of this sort of shape-shifting Sphinx who can just transform into this, like, Labrador. Because I just love those two things together at the same time. There's something strange about that, isn't there? But, like, kind of beautiful as well at the same time. So they're great characters. They're the ones we spend the most time with. But, you know, the sort of other, the tribal people we meet, it's quite episodic in that respect. So we meet, for instance, a race called the Drood, Edwin Drood, Charles Dickens, who are sort of like felines, but have had their tongues stunted, so they can't say the letter D. So there's a lot of cruelty, really, for a child-friendly book. You know, there's people, there's a sort of quite stupid but violent tribe called the Quilps. There's a, as I said before, the hotel where there's the management, but nobody ever sees the management. And then there's I can't remember the name of the tribe, but they're sort of like the biggest fans of the Gamp, and they live just outside the city centre. What are they called now? The Spottled Toes. And they're sort of like a bit like they live on the outskirts of the capital, so they can see all the things that they perceive to be wonderful there, but they can never actually get there because they don't have enough money, and so on and so forth. So in many ways, you know, Michel Faber, coming back to that sort of political illusion, is really dealing with lots of different subsections of society and how they respond to government control and tyranny. Because the Gamp is, you know, by you know, common consensus, is an absolute tyrant and a despot, and ultimately that becomes his downfall when what he is named. So that's fascinating. So yeah, I really enjoyed this, but as I say, it wasn't what I was expecting. But then I shouldn't have expectations of what a book will be based on an author's previous work, you know. I would hate it if, you know, as a writer, if people thought they could predict exactly what I produce based on things I've done before, because I'm not really interested in doing that. I mean, sometimes I am. Sometimes I fall into sort of a style or a vogue of I'm going to write like this for a while, and then I break out of it because I want to, and why shouldn't Michel Faber do that? You know, we shouldn't expect things from anybody. So, you know, I think he has also said as well in the past, I don't have a citation for this, but I think he has sort of said that he's not particularly interested in writing another adult kind of novel, despite the fact that the publishing industry seems to want to label everything a novel. So this is, you know, his, I guess, alternative, and, you know, obviously an author will write, you know, where their interest lies and in the style and format that they're interested in writing, because you can't write without passion for what you're doing. Otherwise, you know, I think you can read it a mile off. It's like when you're watching someone perform and their heart's not in it. It's like you don't always know exactly what it is, or you can't articulate why you can't become immersed as you would if there was full commitment, but you absolutely notice there's something wrong, you know. And so yeah, this is delightful, actually. Would I have preferred a more adult take on it? Yeah, I actually think I would have preferred a more adult take on it, but actually I do know why, or I think I know why it is this. There's something about the whimsy of fairy tales and hidden lands that's not only a sort of love letter to them, but also, you know, goes back to the idea of like myth, fairy tale, folklore is like they persist because they're useful ways to tell these stories, and would it be as effectively communicated if it became more complex? Because I suppose, what would adult mean? Would it mean more sexually explicit? Would it mean there was more bad language? You know, would it mean the violence was greater? Probably. But would that help tell the story that this book tells any better? Probably not, actually. Probably not. So there you see, you've got me live on camera debating my thoughts on the book, rather than, but that's good, isn't it? You know, come to it in real time. Maybe my opinion will change next week. Who can say? So there we go. That is D, A Tale of Two Worlds by Michel Faber. Anybody read any Michel Faber before? If so, which ones? And do you like Faber as an author? I've read probably about half of his books, and I will probably go on to read more of them in the future, but not right now. It's not like a sort of burning desire, because I've got a TBR that's ridiculous, as you know. But I'm really glad I read this. It was a very pleasurable, easygoing experience, which still made me think, and I've needed something sort of, you know, lulling and accessible at the moment, with being back at work and the sort of, you know, day-to-day stress of being back in the workplace with everything that's going on, and just running from here, there and everywhere, and so on and so forth. So this has been a sort of tonic. So I really, really appreciated it for that. Okay, so without further ado, that means that the library is now closed, my darlings, albeit temporarily, so do put your library cards somewhere safe and pick up a promotional t-shirt on the way out. Ooh, libraries open t-shirts, that'd be mint, wouldn't it? If you don't know, I found a badge the other day, I said the other day, it was about a month, featuring a that says the library is open on it with an open book, which I think is actually an allusion to Drag Race, or, you know, sort of drag culture, as in reading, the library is open to alling. But I bought a couple, they're on my Instagram actually, which if you don't follow me on Instagram and you'd like to, it's at Creeping Miasma, all lowercase. And you can see a picture on there of the badges, which I love, and I need to start wearing in the videos. So yeah. Where else can you follow me if you want to? Oh, on Twitter at Stuart Crowther. That's STU ARTCROWTHER. I'm dead nice and I don't post nasty things. So do stand off in the comments below if you enjoyed this video, or if you have anything to say about Michel Faber, Charles Dickens, politics, whimsical worlds, and all the other things we've discussed in this video. Also bathrooms if you like. Happy to hear about your bathrooms. Why not? In 2020, all bets are off. Okay, but in the meantime, take care of yourselves. Thank you so much for watching. Lots of love for each and every one of you. Stay safe. Mwah.